Have you ever paused to think about how close you've been to danger without even knowing it? At the hospital, we guide you through these intense moments, one story at a time. But before you get lost in the narrative, take a moment to like this video and share where you're tuning in from. Now, let's immerse ourselves in these spine-tingling tales. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel if you feel this video is good, and relax. Thanks you very much. The Rooftop Shadow. It was a cold December night in New York City. The wind howled through the narrow streets, and snowflakes fluttered under the dim glow of streetlights. Inside St. Mary's Hospital, the corridors were eerily quiet. Anna, a young nurse on the night shift, sipped her lukewarm coffee and glanced at the clock. It was 3:07 a.m., the dead of night, when time seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Anna had been working at the hospital for 2 years, and though she was used to the quiet moments of the night shift, there was something unsettling about this particular evening. The usual hum of machines and distant chatter of staff seemed muted, as if the hospital itself were holding its breath. She was reviewing patient charts when the intercom crackled to life. "Anna, could you check the rooftop? Maintenance reported hearing footsteps up there earlier. Just make sure everything's secure." Anna frowned. The rooftop? That area was supposed to be locked after hours. Only authorized personnel had access, and even then, it was rare for anyone to go up there at night. Still, she grabbed her flashlight and headed toward the stairwell leading to the top floor. Her sneakers squeaked softly against the polished linoleum floor as she walked, the sound echoing faintly in the empty hallway. The climb up the stairs felt endless. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the cracked paint on the walls. Anna's heart began to race as she reached the final landing. The door to the rooftop was slightly ajar, swaying gently as the cold wind pushed against it. A chill ran down her spine. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. No response. Taking a deep breath, she stepped through the doorway. The rooftop was covered in a thin layer of snow, glistening under the pale light of the moon. The city stretched out before her, a sea of twinkling lights and darkened windows. But what drew her attention wasn't the breathtaking view. It was the figure standing at the edge of the rooftop. It was a man, tall and thin, dressed in a hospital gown. His back was turned to her, and he seemed to be staring down at the street below. The gown billowed slightly in the wind, and Anna could see his bare feet pressing into the snow. "Sir, you're not supposed to be up here," Anna said, taking a cautious step forward. Her voice was firm, but her hands trembled. "It's dangerous. Please come away from the edge." The man didn't move. He didn't even seem to register her presence. Anna's unease grew. She took another step closer, her flashlight beam steady on his back. "Sir, can you hear me?" She tried again. Slowly, the man turned his head. His movements were unnaturally slow, as if his body were resisting him. When he finally faced her, Anna felt her breath catch in her throat. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were hollow sockets, dark and empty. A faint smile played on his lips, but it wasn't one of warmth. It was cold, almost mocking. Anna stumbled back, her flashlight slipping from her grip and clattering onto the ground. She could barely hear the sound over the roaring in her ears. The man's mouth opened, but instead of words, a low, guttural sound emerged, echoing eerily in the night air. "Oh, who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Without answering, the man stepped backward, closer to the edge. Anna's instincts kicked in, and she lunged forward, reaching out to grab him. But before her fingers could make contact, he vanished. One moment he was there, and the next, he dissolved into the air like smoke dispersing in the wind. Anna stood frozen, her mind racing to comprehend what she had just witnessed. The rooftop was silent again, the snow untouched except for her own footprints. Trembling, she picked up her flashlight and hurried back inside, slamming the rooftop door shut behind her. She leaned against the cold metal door, her chest heaving. Was it exhaustion playing tricks on her mind? A hallucination brought on by too many sleepless nights? No, she had seen him. She was certain of it. Back at the nurse's station, Anna tried to compose herself. She wanted to tell someone, But how could she explain what she'd seen without sounding insane? As she sat there, the intercom crackled again. Anna, everything okay? Did you find anything on the rooftop? She hesitated. No, everything's fine. Must have been the wind or something. All right, thanks. Get some rest if you can. The rest of her shift passed uneventfully, but Anna couldn't shake the image of the man from her mind. When her shift ended at 7 a.m., she decided to confide in one of her colleagues, an older nurse named Margaret who had worked at the hospital for over 3 decades. Margaret's face grew serious as Anna recounted her experience. When Anna finished, Margaret nodded slowly. You're not the first to see him, Margaret said quietly. There's a story about the rooftop. Years ago, a man was admitted to the psych ward here. He was battling severe depression. One night, he managed to slip away from the staff and made his way to the roof. They found him the next morning, but it was too late. He jumped. Anna's stomach churned. You think it was him? Margaret shrugged. I don't know what to believe, but you're not the first person to describe seeing a man in a hospital gown up there. Some say his spirit lingers, replaying his final moments. The story stayed with Anna long after that night. She avoided the rooftop as much as possible, but every so often, she'd hear whispers from other staff about strange occurrences. Footsteps echoing in the stairwell, doors creaking open on their own, and fleeting glimpses of a shadowy figure at the edge of the roof. Anna never saw him again, but she often found herself glancing at the rooftop door during her shifts, half expecting to hear the sound of faint footsteps above. And each time she did, a shiver ran down her spine, a chilling reminder of the man who never truly left St. Mary's Hospital. The cry in the emergency room. It was an unusually quiet night at Boston General Hospital. Dr. James Carter, a seasoned ER physician, leaned back in his chair, sipping his 3rd cup of coffee. The clock on the wall read 2:45 a.m. The emergency room, which was often chaotic, was eerily still. The occasional hum of a heart monitor or the distant clatter of a cart rolling down the hallway were the only sounds breaking the silence. James' thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, a soft, muffled crying. It was subtle at first, almost blending into the white noise of the hospital. But as he strained his ears, the sound grew clearer. It was unmistakably the cry of a child. Strange, he muttered, setting his coffee cup down. There were no pediatric cases in the ER that night. He double-checked the patient list on the computer screen in front of him. No children had been admitted. The crying continued, coming from the direction of room 12, a room that had been out of use for months due to renovations. The hospital's administrative delays meant the room had been left untouched, its door locked and lights turned off. Curious and slightly uneasy, James grabbed his flashlight and headed down the dimly lit hallway. As he approached room 12, the crying grew louder. It was heart-wrenching, the sound of a child in distress. James felt a pang of concern. Could someone have accidentally locked a child inside? He reached the door and tested the handle. It was unlocked, which struck him as odd. Pushing it open, James stepped inside. The room was cold, far colder than the rest of the hospital. A single flickering fluorescent light cast long, erratic shadows across the empty space. The crying stopped abruptly as the door closed behind him. "Hello!" James called out, his voice echoing slightly. The room was empty. The only furnishings were an old hospital bed, a chair, and a cabinet against the far wall. Dust coated every surface, undisturbed. James frowned, scanning the room with his flashlight. There was no sign of anyone, let alone a child. He stepped farther inside, his shoes crunching softly on the dusty floor. As he moved closer to the bed, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. A small, worn teddy bear sitting on the mattress. It hadn't been there moments ago. He reached out to pick it up. The bear's fur was matted, and one of its button eyes was missing. As James examined it, a faint giggle echoed through the room. It was light and airy, but unmistakably that of a child. "Who's there?" James demanded, spinning around. The room was still empty. The giggle was followed by the sound of small, quick footsteps, as if a child were running just out of sight. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, determined to get to the bottom of the strange events. James stepped out into the hallway. Security, he called into his radio. I'm in room 12. Can you check the security cameras for this area? I thought I heard someone in here. A moment later, the voice of the night guard crackled back. Dr. Carter, there's nothing on the feed. Room 12 is completely empty. Are you sure you saw something? James hesitated. Just keep an eye on it. He returned to the room, determined not to let his imagination get the better of him. As he entered, the door slammed shut behind him with a loud bang. James jumped, spinning around. The handle wouldn't budge when he tried to open it. He was locked in. The temperature in the room seemed to drop even further. Frost began forming on the edges of the window, and James could see his breath in the air. The crying started again, louder this time, echoing all around him. What do you want? He shouted, his voice shaking. The light flickered and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. James fumbled for his flashlight, the beam slicing through the black. He swept it across the room, and his heart nearly stopped. In the corner stood a figure, a little girl, no older than 6 or 7. She wore a tattered hospital gown, her hair matted and covering most of her face. She clutched another teddy bear tightly in her small hands. Are you okay? James asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He took a cautious step toward her. The girl didn't move. Her head tilted slightly to the side, and she let out another soft giggle. It wasn't the innocent sound of a child at play. It was cold and unsettling. Suddenly, she looked up, and James saw her eyes, or rather, the empty, dark voids where her eyes should have been. The flashlight flickered and went out. The crying grew louder, now accompanied by whispers that seemed to come from every direction. James' breathing quickened as he backed away, his hand fumbling for the door handle. When the lights came back on, the girl was gone. The whispers and crying ceased, leaving the room deathly silent. The door creaked open on its own, and James stumbled out into the hallway, his heart pounding. He hurried back to the nurse's station, where his colleague, Linda, looked up in concern. James, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. He hesitated, unsure how to explain what had just happened. Finally, he said, I think room 12 is haunted. Linda's expression changed. She glanced around to make sure no one else was listening before leaning in. You're not the first to say that, she whispered. They say a little girl died there years ago. Her parents brought her in for surgery, but there were complications. She didn't make it. Ever since then, people have reported hearing her crying or seeing her shadow in the hallway. James stared at her, his mind racing. Why hasn't the hospital done anything about it? Linda shrugged. Management dismisses it as superstition. But anyone who's worked the night shift here long enough knows better. Over the following weeks, James couldn't shake the experience. He began researching the hospital's history and found a record of a girl named Emily who had died in room 12 nearly 20 years ago. Her parents had donated a teddy bear to the hospital in her memory, but it had gone missing shortly after her death. Determined to bring closure to the girl's spirit, James tracked down the bear he had found in the room that night. He placed it on the bed in room 12 and spoke softly. Emily, I'm sorry for what happened to you. I hope you can find peace now. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the air in the room grew warmer, and a sense of calm washed over him. The crying never returned, and room 12 was finally put back into use. But even years later, James couldn't forget the little girl's empty eyes or the chilling sound of her giggle. Though the hospital seemed quieter, he knew some spirits lingered, watching from the shadows, waiting to be noticed. The nameless patient. The Chicago Memorial Hospital loomed over the city like a monolith. Its old, weathered walls seemed to breathe with the weight of the countless lives that had passed through its halls. It was a place where miracles happened, but also where tragedy often left its mark. Among the staff, there was a story they only whispered during late-night shifts, a tale of a mysterious patient who appeared but was never recorded in any logbook. It was nearing 2 a.m. on a particularly quiet night when Lisa, a young and relatively new nurse, was reviewing patient charts at the nurse's station. Her shift had been uneventful, with most of the patients sleeping and no new arrivals in hours. She liked these peaceful nights, where she could catch up on paperwork and maybe steal a moment for herself. Her momentary calm was interrupted by the soft, buzz of the intercom. A voice, flat and emotionless, echoed through the speaker. "Nurse Lisa, please report to room 404. Lisa's brow furrowed. Room 404? That couldn't be right. She had been told during orientation that room 404 was permanently closed after a fire had gutted that part of the building years ago. The area was off limits, its doors sealed, and the room left to decay. Yet, the voice was unmistakable, and it was clear they had called her name specifically. Curiosity mixed with unease as Lisa grabbed her flashlight and made her way to the abandoned wing. The corridor leading to room 404 was darker than the rest of the hospital, its fluorescent lights flickering intermittently. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the warmth. Each step echoed ominously, amplifying the eerie silence. When she reached the door to room 404, Lisa hesitated. The door was slightly ajar, though she distinctly remembered being told it was sealed shut. A faint smell of burning wood and chemicals lingered in the air, a ghostly reminder of the fire that had ravaged this part of the hospital. Taking a deep breath, Lisa pushed the door open. Her flashlight illuminated the room, revealing charred walls and broken furniture. A single hospital bed stood in the center, its metal frame twisted and blackened. Despite the devastation, the air carried a strange stillness, as if time had frozen within these walls. "Hello?" Lisa called out, her voice trembling. "Is anyone here?" For a moment, there was no response. Then, from the shadows, a faint groan echoed. Lisa's flashlight beam darted toward the sound. On the bed lay a figure, a man in a tattered hospital gown. His skin was ashen, his hair matted with sweat. He looked up at her with hollow eyes that seemed to see right through her. I need help," the man rasped, his voice barely audible. Lisa froze. How could someone be here? She fought the urge to run and instead stepped closer. "Sir, are you a patient? How did you get here?" The man's lips trembled, as if he were trying to form words, but all that came out was a low, guttural moan. His hands clutched at the edge of the bed, his knuckles white. Lisa noticed that his wrists were marked with bruises, as if he had been restrained recently. "Stay right here," she said, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. "I'll get help." As Lisa turned to leave, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. She spun around, her flashlight flickering. The man on the bed was no longer lying down. He was sitting upright, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, staring directly at her. Lisa's breath quickened. She tried the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through her veins. She turned back to the man, who was now standing beside the bed. His movements were slow and deliberate, his body swaying as if he were struggling to remain upright. "Why won't you help me?" he asked, his voice echoing strangely in the small room. Lisa's mind raced. I want to help you, but I need to get someone. Let me out, and I'll come back with help." The man's hollow eyes narrowed. "They said that too. They always said they'd come back." His voice grew louder, more anguished. "But they never did. They left me here." Lisa stepped back, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "Who left you? What happened here?" The man's expression twisted into one of pain and fury. "They forgot about me. The fire, it wasn't supposed to happen. I called for help, but no one came." He took a step closer, and Lisa instinctively backed away, her back pressing against the cold door. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't know. I wasn't here when it happened." The man's form seemed to waver, as if he were struggling to maintain his presence. His voice softened, filled with sorrow. "I've been waiting so long. I just want to rest." A sudden wave of courage surged through Lisa. She stepped forward, meeting his gaze. "Tell me how to help you. How can I make this right?" The man's eyes glistened, and for a moment, he looked almost human. "They never said my name," he whispered. "They never wrote it down. I died here, nameless, forgotten. Say my name, remember me." Lisa's throat tightened. "Well, what is your name?" The man opened his mouth to answer, but no sound came out. His form began to dissolve, his body fading into wisps of smoke. The air grew warmer, and the oppressive weight lifted from the room. Just before he disappeared completely, Lisa heard his voice, faint and distant. Michael. My name was Michael. The door to room 404 creaked open, and Lisa stumbled into the hallway. Her colleagues found her moments later, pale and shaken. She told them everything, though many dismissed it as exhaustion or a vivid hallucination. But Lisa knew what she had experienced. She began researching the hospital's records and found a brief mention of a patient named Michael who had been admitted to room 40 for the night of the fire. His records were incomplete, and his last name was never recorded. He had been presumed dead, his body never recovered. Lisa arranged for a small plaque to be placed near room 404, bearing the name Michael and the words, "You are remembered." From that day forward, the strange occurrences around room 404 ceased. But Lisa never forgot the nameless patient and the lesson he taught her, that even in death, every life deserves to be acknowledged. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed these chilling stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling content. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a terrifying tale. Stay curious and stay safe.